Welcome to another episode of B2B Marketing Futures, the podcast for B2B marketers sponsored by AdSact, the B2B ad platform. Today we are diving into product-led growth versus sales-led growth. These models aren't opposites, they often coexist, overlap, and evolve inside the same company. And in this episode, we'll unpack how PLG and SLG interact in B2B environments, where each model shines, breaks, and how leading teams decide when and how to layer in sales. We'll also explore the attribution, organizational alignment, and cultural challenges that come with shifting to a product-first mindset. But before we jump in, let's meet our guests and hear a bit about their background and current focus. So, Shaq, would you like to start?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hey everyone, I'm Meshach. I've spent the last decade or so leading growth and lifecycle marketing across a number of different B2B companies, most recently heading up product-led growth at Commvault, and then driving AI go-to-market at Timescale. I specialize in building systems that turn product usage into revenue, whether that's activating self-serve users or partnering with scales to scale enterprise deals. I'm excited to dig in today and talk about PLG versus SLG and how companies might need both.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shaq. Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Joaquin. So hello, everybody. My name is Jason Recacho. I'm currently a senior product marketing manager at Iterable, and I've had previous experience at Amplitude and Intercom. So, my role as both, like a product marketing leader, as well as understanding the ecosystems, as well as partner marketing. I definitely have my experience in both the SLG and PLG motions, as well as the continuing involvement of like a hybrid type role, as we start evolving our go-to-market strategies. So glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jason. And Ishita, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Ishita Jariwala, and I have built and scaled startup programs at Stripe, MongoDB, and MathWorks. I have mostly spent over a decade of my career in B2B SaaS in very technical companies targeting developers. And the startup programs have also been for the developer audience, the emerging developers, that sort of thing. For those that are not familiar with what startup programs are, they are really go-to-market motions targeted to a startup with a offering built for that startup, which could be a special discount or some sort of credits, as well as a path that is designed for a startup journey, which often means it's an overlap between PLG and SLG. And I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for those great intros. Let's start with the basic and some examples, okay? In your experience, how do PLG and SLG show up in go-to-market strategy, and what does that setup actually look like, and how the two approaches interact day to day?
Happy to share my perspective on this. So in my experience, PLG is often the front door, and they are not two different motions. So PLG is a front door, it adds scale, and SLG, sales-led growth, in my opinion, adds depth. So for the startup programs at Stripe, we saw a lot of startups coming in through our self-serve channel as well as through the sales channel. And they had different experiences, and a lot of the work that we had to do was unify that experience into a single journey and define how and when we want to layer on sales.
Interesting. I can also pick up back off of that. Very similar to Isha's, I've worked in the developer tooling space. And the last role I had leading AI go-to-market, there was actually two flavors of PLG. So you have this open source project, and then you have a traditional cloud platform where there's a free trial. And typically what we used our open source project was to really validate product channel fit and understand the resonance that has in the market with developers, and took a very practitioner focus first. And then we saw as we scale the market maturity from open source, then we led with our cloud adoption and try to drive users in from our open source project into our cloud platform. But also at the same time, there's some open source users that are going directly from open source into a more traditional enterprise selling motion because they're attached to a larger account. So the way I look at open source and more traditional PLG through a free trial is using PLG to either scale up an account from commercial into enterprise, or taking that practitioner into a more commercial monetized motion. So it's kind of nuanced in terms of like dealing with open source technology and how PLG relates to it. But It's really interesting to kind of see how you can kind of position both of those into each of the go-to-market motions that we're speaking about today.
Yeah, definitely. When you speak to both of them from a common theme narrative, it really starts out with the idea of discovery. From a PLG standpoint, obviously the fundamentals for it is this kind of like self-serve value discovery from a user perspective. But we all know as well, depending on the organization and companies, it's not just one person who's going to be a decision maker, unless you're a solo entrepreneur, maybe even an SMB side of a smaller scale organization. There's going to be multiple stakeholders at play. And we know then that these kind of buying committees have those different key attributes. We also know that they're also conducting their own research, PLG being one of them in terms of self-discovery. SLG is a great way from an overlay to have that sales hand-holding in terms of developing that art of the possible. So I think their execution goals from that perspective may differ. I mean, their execution tactics may be different, but their goals are all the same in terms of providing that awareness and discovery for those, those interested in learning more.
And what are the common challenges of implementing a PLG motion versus SLG?
I can take a stab at this one. I think it comes down with the misconception that PLG sits with one team and not a overall company strategy. I've been in environments where PLG has worked really, really well, and that's when all teams, marketing, product, engineering, sales, all work together and make PLG a part of their strategy. I've also been in environments where we just didn't get PLG right because we had teams, one or more had the idea that PLG wasn't necessarily their responsibility. And when you get into environments where it's not a cross-functional strategy across the entire company, you get pitfalls, right? When it comes to metric alignment, when it comes to responsibilities and roles, and even attribution gets a little messy. Typically, I think the biggest challenge comes with like true clear swim lanes, but also a overall executive approach to making PLG a part of everyone's responsibility in some capacity.
I'd like to echo that. I think that is very well articulated because go-to-market success for any company comes between the interdependence between PLG and SLG, and everybody must understand what the journey of the user is and what their role comes in and where it comes in. And in my experience, the starter program was a really good test bed for that because we would get these high growth users come in and sign up, and they were not ready to start talking to sales yet. But when they would get discounts or credits or whatever that is, we had to align the sales organization on when is the right time to talk to these users. But we also had to align with our finance team on how does compensation work for these sales reps, because you're giving away discount and it's often in conflict with what sales is willing to do. So it really required alignment with, the marketing organization on who we want to target, with the sales organization on when to step in and how compensation comes into place, the finance organization, as well as, talking to the community and events even of which are the right users to target for smaller events versus larger community-driven events. So to summarize, for me, it is really good when the teams understand the user journey and where their role comes into play. And the challenges come in when they don't have a good understanding of that and the metrics and how they...
Sorry, one question. Is that specific? Are those specific challenges for a PLG motion? Because it sounds very obvious that sales and marketing needs to be aligned in any organization, whatever if it's SLG or a PLG motion. Is there something special in PLG that requires more alignment?
I think it does, because I think it's just not a traditional funnel, right? So typically with like marketing and sales alignment in a traditional enterprise selling motion or SLG, you have marketing doing a clear handoff to sales. When it comes to PLG, marketing has a nuanced position in almost every part of the customer lifecycle, even post-purchase, right? So you kind of have to think about marketing's running experiments, running growth, running programs throughout the entire free trial experience. That's including onboarding, that's including activation, that's including expansion or free trial conversion. And then we're also, building out these signals to then alert sales like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to step in and handhold this account to if you're doing like a pay as you go, maybe a commit contract, right? Or if it's a consumption based model, here's, another way to save this company money, but also get a contract or ACV off of it. So I think, it's a little different because there's no clear defined stop. And then in order to also work across the entire customer lifecycle, you also have to work with product, right? If you're doing experimentation and programs within the product, right? If you're not just leveraging email as a tool, then you have to work across product engineering to get notifications or nudges, either signal to other channels downstream or actually impact the user experience to kind of help nudge users into the motion.
And I also want to stress on what you said over here, because one of the key differences here is when a customer comes in through PLG, they're already familiar with the product and they're already using it, which is different from traditional marketing and sales. And if they're just coming to the sales motion where they might not have used the product and they are still getting sold on the value of it, but here they're already sold on at least part of the value. And then it is, how do we, sales comes in to help define how do you make the most of the product? What is the right offer for you? What is the right value for you?
I think that it just sums it up from that perspective. And I think the key takeaway is that if you are a heavy SLG motion organization, and trying to incorporate PLG from that perspective, the common misconception that it's an SLG killer from that perspective. But really what it is an extension. It's another channel and an extension of your go-to-market strategy. To your point, Meshach, the handoff is not as, like cut and dry from a SLG motion where then, you're looping in your sales team to either close the deal or land expansion from that perspective. Again, the idea of PLG is really like user discovery from that perspective. They are then discovering the value as opposed to your SLG team selling the value of maybe their existing instance with a possible expansion, or even just finding that value as a whole. So it's just really like who's determining that source of value and what's influencing from that perspective. So PLG motions provide that alternate channel, like an alternative extension channel of your overall go-to-market strategy that that can be very fruitful on both facets.
Yeah, and PLG can also, if I could add just one more before we get to the next question, I think PLG can also act as both as a qualifier and disqualifier for sales, right? So when you have these smaller accounts that ultimately will give the overall business incremental revenue, it's great, but oftentimes, sales doesn't want to, deal with an account that's only going to be a $5,000 annual contract, right? That makes no sense for, them to waste their time getting on the phone when they're trying to chase, contracts that are going to be 15, 20, 50K, right? And I think PLG allows for us to qualify users earlier on if they're the right type of signal into sales, right? And I think oftentimes we have to do a little education and to our like sales partners to kind of help them understand like, hey, PLG is not here to cannibalize your sales. It's actually here to help you do your work more efficiently and get some of that noise away that doesn't necessarily need a handheld through the sales process.
Yeah. Just the even extension of that, especially Meshach, with your growth and lifestyle experience. I mean, one of the advantages with PLG from that perspective, and even me as a product marketing manager, in terms of understanding your target audience, ICP, and persona perspective, the data and analytics that you can, from PLG motions, especially from a growth perspective, if you're tracking whether it's, like customer journeys within your website, mobile implications, views, like visits, those metrics then become great data points for your overall GTM teams to develop your strategy in terms of like, who is the best fit, who's been not the best fit. And to your point as well, on the SLG motions, like this potential prospect doesn't have those right signals for a successful closed one, and then cut your losses, cut your time, and move on to a better qualified prospect or an existing customer with a potential for expansion.
Very good points.
Yeah, and it sounds like with PLG you can amplify the benefits of sales and marketing alignment and also the risks of sales and marketing alignment. If you are not aligned because they are interacting with your product, you can break the relationship immediately, right? They don't have, or you don't have second chances of failing if they don't like the product. In a sales-led motion, you can still move things around. You have more chances. You can have more meetings. So yeah,
I think that when PLG and SLG are done right, you're not shipping the org structure to the customer. I think that's what happens when it is not done correctly, and it is so obvious to the customer that the journey is broken and they are getting different touch points which are not talking to each other.
Yeah. All right. So let's discuss at what point do you layer in sales? What signals? Is it usage, account data? I don't know. What signals do you rely on to make that call, and how do you avoid making that move too early or too late?
I think if it's really good, all the above.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, especially if you're able to determine the larger accounts very quickly, whether that, is, losing like Zoom info or Clearbit to kind of append and identify, hey, like these are, are enterprise level accounts. So let's immediately try to, route these to sales and signal to the org there. But oftentimes, sometimes, based off of its usage, right? Because, say several of the companies I've worked for in the past several years and the developers have been all on a consumption-based model. And sometimes you'll get a like small company that is digitally native and AI native, and you wouldn't think they would have a large spend, but their entire business model is built on the data infrastructure that they're leveraging. So they'll come in and with a tremendous amount of spend that maybe were not picked up in an earlier kind of signal or PQL model, but then by usage and interaction with the product, you understand this is actual company or account that needs to be leveraged for sales. So it's not always purely kind of like traditional account size, but it can be, but it also can be product usage depending on how your product is consumed and how it's the monetization model behind it.
Yeah. To echo to that, yes, usage, account data are two important factors of when they should come in. The other thing, at least for the starter program, was we're looking at funding and growth. Mm-hmm. So even if we didn't get usage and account data to the levels we wanted, and if we saw a customer was really growing, that would be a point where sales should be talking to these startups to understand why they are not growing with us. So that would be a good point, time to layer in sales. Also, even like what is the product adoption that these startups or users are having, right? If it is just, when you have a multi-product ecosystem and you want to grow the usage of other products, which would be the right thing for the customer, that would be a right time to even layer sales in. If it is like a technical product or you want to bring in, like risk of churn, for example.
Yeah, I think with PLG, what's nice, obviously, the self-serve and discovery, and then navigating your own way from that perspective. At some point, you're going to hit some sort of threshold from that perspective where maybe you're looking for some more advanced features from that perspective and you need some sort of engagement. Or especially when businesses start to scale from that perspective, there's going to be certain needs within their business models where integrations might be paramount, especially when you're looking at investing your technology in platforms that have interoperability and have that ecosystem. So those discussions need to be had beyond just self-discovery from that perspective. Again, I think it really just boils down to like, where's the customer within their journey of discovery and what are their existing use cases now and then potential use cases for the future. That's where then that kind of like overlay comes in as those signals to, like have that either one-to-one handoff or maybe something in conjunction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something you had said, Jason, resonated with me because right now I'm doing some consulting for a stealth startup, but they have this open source project that they're getting ready to launch into market. Typically with open source projects, there's always a level of hesitance on adding too much product telemetry in an open source project because then it's like, is it truly open source? And you have a lot of security, privacy hesitance there, especially in the developer cybersecurity area. But something you did mention to me that could probably be very useful when you think about open source with a PLG framework is that when do you migrate open source users into a more kind of monetized motion? And sometimes it's not about usage, but it is about features, right? It is about, hey, this open source project isn't scaling the way I wanted to scale, and now I need these additional features to kind of help me scale there. So I think whoever's listening to this podcast that's doing open source and banging their head on the window, like, what do I do? Maybe look at the feature adoption and that critical point of when does that typically happen, and build messaging around there to kind of help migrate your community into a more monetized model.
I experienced that too at a startup I was working previously, where PLG worked great for initial test beds, but then it was sales we really needed to bring in when there were security concerns or working with proprietary data, which is when you have to bring in sales to be that enhancement layer and to actually make that workable. Because in some companies, PLG is very easy, where it could be the users who can test out the whole product. You don't need any security, permissions and that sort of a thing. But as soon as a product gets technical, it deals with proprietary data, that's when you really need to bring in sales. And that is the alignment that needs to happen internally.
Yeah, I have a really interesting story. So the company I worked at a company, a cybersecurity company. They initially hired me in to run their kind of PLG go to market strategy. And literally the first 3 months there, I was like, oh, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
There's too much configurability with cybersecurity products that doesn't lend itself for a user to really get the value of the product within their free trial. And I'm looking at these support and engineering SLAs, and I'm like, they're extending beyond the free trial. So it really didn't make sense to leverage the PLG motion or the free trial for a self-serve monetization. And what we wind up doing cleverly was build out a hybrid approach, which we would land accounts leveraging the free trial to build a POC that would then morph into like a hybrid kind of sales-led model where users who are getting the help and set up in the free trial would then work with an account manager to set things up and ultimately becoming a customer that way. And we did that, tested out on our expansion positioning and campaigns for revenue, and then we went kind of on the acquisition side once we saw that we got the kinks out the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that happen multiple times in data developer companies for sure. I still feel PLG has a role to play here in surfacing what the product value is, what are the other users doing to build out like what is this product about. But you in that case need to bring in sales much earlier in the process and need to be clear of how you want to figure out the account and the usage signal and who this product is for.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that signal can be also too, especially if we're kind of doing that double click, even from a solutions and vertical based motion from that perspective, it could be not even the user or the company itself. It could be just based on the regulations of their industry. Yeah. To your point with with security aspects, PLG motions in financial services don't last very long, especially if you're scaling from an enterprise perspective, or healthcare from that perspective as well, is you're going to need that implementation guidance, from an SLG perspective and also regulatory understanding from that. Something that, that is from a self-serve discovery aspect, that's definitely above a user's element, unless that user is within that field and understands all of the apparent risks of their organization from a tech stack perspective, which is very rare, not impossible, but rare. So I think beyond just the growth of the organization, it's an industry as well, and the rules that they play by, and then the non-negotiables where that I guess that wall where you hit sometimes is user driven or sometimes it's industry or vertical driven.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen work, at least for the STAR program, which gives some flexibility here, is most of these startup programs are more of a reverse trial. So here you're exposing a lot of the, pretty much everything because you're giving the customer a certain amount of discount or credits, right? So then they don't have to worry so much about the security and those sort of things. Where they hit the wall is on the technical implementation, if it is a very technical product. And the way that I've designed a lot of these startup journeys for these technical startups or technical products is you give them the reverse trial, but then instead of sales, we brought on like technical implementation as an added on offer for these users. And you bring them to success. So when sales is talking to them, it is more about the conversion at the end of the credit usage or whatever the trial that we've defined is. And, you have to bring in hand raise opportunities throughout the user's journey.
Well, amazing. So we've covered a lot today, from internal alignment to GTM triggers, the PLG limits as well. So to close out, what advice would you give to B2B marketers trying to make PLG and SLG play nicely together in real world?
Yeah, I can actually start. I think the key takeaway in this all is that, first of all, it's not going to be a one size fit all. And I think also too, just looking at the modern tech stack from that perspective, it's not a PLG versus SLG, or which one comes first from that perspective. What we're starting to see now is that modern go-to-market strategy is a dynamic blend of both in some capacities, whether or not the organization is actually acknowledging that they're initiating both, because with PLG, it's going to maximize reach, efficiency, and user-driven discovery. Also, too, even from a marketing standpoint, it's going to drive awareness of your platform. And then SLG layered in for that high-touch expansion, complex deals that involve interoperability, ecosystem, or even channel partners from that perspective. But I think in number one, from an SLG standpoint, where you can't really eliminate it or not acknowledge its existence is that strategic alignment. I mean, that's where that really helps understand that vision that you're trying to drive from a go-to-market strategy. So regardless if you're utilizing that true dictionary definition terminology of one versus the other, I think, taking considerations of both as you develop your strategy or fine-tune your strategies.
That's great, Jason. Piggyback off of that, I think my two takeaways, and one that I was a little surprised we didn't talk about, but I'll bring it up, is I think with the increasing amounts of AI use cases and co-pilots, and especially the SaaS platform space, I think we're going to continue to see more and more hybrid models become the norm, where it starts off as PLG because of the AI native co-pilot features. And as you mentioned, as these deals get more and more complex, then you layer in that high touch sales-led, hybrid kind of monetization model to secure longer term contracts and deals. I think because of that hybrid approach and increasingly the lines getting a little more blurred in terms of like PLG and SLG, I think my second point I want to make too, that and drive home, and I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, that it has to be really cross-functional, right? And you have to get really good at alignment across all the different teams. That PLG, SLG, hybrid models, they are everybody's responsibilities, and a clear executive buy-in and RACI model will help clear the air and identify what happens when and what teams are responsible for what. But I think as long as you think of that, hey, like this is part of my responsibility and I just need to step in and be a good partner to make sure that this motion goes well, I think you're in a good place and a good foundation for a start of PLG or SLG or hybrid model.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I agree with you that with AI, PLG and SLG, a hybrid motion is going to be the future. There is no way that people can wait to try a product out. PLG has to be the starting point, and as layering on SLG is important. So my key takeaway to anybody who's listening, it would be to think about the customer's journey as a system and when you want to bring in what layers. So be a system builder and who fits in through the journey and where they fit in, and alignment around metrics, which might evolve, thinking about how activation or monetization. So data and systems would be the two things that will be a superpower as a B2B marketer in this future of PLG, SLG debate.
Great points. Thank you so much for sharing these takeaways and for sharing your knowledge about this amazing topic, and for all the ones listening to B2B Marketing Futures. If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to share it with your team and drop us a note on LinkedIn and Instagram or YouTube. Please share this with your friends and colleagues. See you next time. Thank you so much.